in a village laden with drought, famine, and dying villagers. Rain falls as the prefecture is filled with the cries of a woman trying to give birth. While her husband waits outside, the man closes his eyes and remembers visiting the temple in the hills. What seems like a man going for daily prayers soon reveals to be a massacre of guards and priests in the temple's vicinity. He soon makes his way to the Hall of Hell, where he is greeted by the old main priest. The priest acts as if his action is expected, talking about how the man is there to denounce God and Buddha in favor of the 12 demons. After a bit of a futile attempt to stop him, the man kills the priest, who thanks him for salvation. The man begins his deal and reveals himself to be Daigo Kagemitsu, the governor of Ishikawa, and talks about the disaster taking place in his land, but he is worried more regarding his loss of power. Daigo then asks for the protection of his land and the power to rule over in exchange for anything of his. Suddenly, lightning strikes, and the demons mark a cross on his forehead to seal the deal. At present, Daigo's heir finally gives birth, but suddenly lightning strikes again, this time on the baby, which causes some of the midwives to run away. Daigo immediately runs inside and finds out he has a son, but he takes too much after him. He remembers that the reason his child is in a state of perpetual ugliness is due to the deal, which makes him happy as his wish is fulfilled. Daigo then orders his son's execution to the midwife as he reminds him of the ugliness inside him, but sees that the Buddha's statue had sacrificed its head, which makes him wary. Totally not a spoiler, of course. A demon is awakened as the old midwife takes the ugly baby to the river to drown him. But as she tries to drown him, she suddenly feels merciful and floats him down the river in a boat nearby. Suddenly, the demon appears and devours the bit, who weirdly gives no reaction upon seeing the demon meme of old Rose from Titanic saying, "It's been 84 years. A blind monk also happens to be nearby, and he uses his spidey sense to track and kill the demon with a swipe from his customized shamisen. The demon should learn not to mess with anime old guys. He also senses the ugliness from the boat, but lets him be as he's not evil. 16 years pass and mankind's favorite game, war and massacre, is still taking place. A priest is praying for the departed souls, but he sees Jukai, the doctor who has a weird fetish of attaching prosthetics to the dead bodies, although he claims that he does that to not waste away his creations. Meanwhile, a weird guy is passing by the city, who is pointed out to be wearing a mask by everyone he meets. In the city, we see a kid, Dororo, who's a student at Tate University, hustling out some goods. But he is stopped by some goons, who accuse him of stealing their stuff. The goons try to beat him up, but he manages to escape them with the help of some shit she flinged their way. He stops by the river but gets distracted by a puppy, which in turn causes the goon to get to him. They beat the ever-living shit out of him, but he does not give up. Must be a John Cena fan. Instead, he throws rocks at the leader, popping his eyes and making him intolerant of his shit before deciding to kill him. During the procession, the masked guy from earlier also arrives there. The goons try to negotiate with him, but Dororo explains how he is not looking at them but somewhere else. A garbage patch floats nearby as Mr. Mask looks at it intently, but the goons try to brush it off. But suddenly the patch turns out to be a demon, which catches and eats the goons in an instant. The blob also catches Dororo for dessert, but Mr. Mask suddenly whips out his blade hidden inside his arms. He manages to defeat the demon with the help of his hidden blades, and Dororo finds out that he cannot see or hear as he reattaches his limbs. As he begins to yap about how cool he is, suddenly his skin begins to appear on his face. I mean, the audience already knows who Mr. Mask is at this point. Also, Lord Daigo is on his highest alert as he sees lightning strike the temple, which reminds him of his mark. Worried, Daigo returns to the halls, but he is shocked to see one of the statues split open by the lightning from earlier, which shocks him, while a landslide occurs close to the hall. At his prefecture, he and his wife have a new child, Tahamaru, who exclaims about making his sick mother stronger from the dove he hunted. Daigo's wife, though, is worried about the son they killed. Looking at the headless statue, Jukai is still seen on the battlefield, but it seems he actually knows Mr. Mask or Hyakimaru, as he puts on a similar mask to the dead body. Meanwhile, Hyakimaru is still in shock due to his new face as Dororo questions if he is a human. The Spider-Man priest meets with a demon trying to make a deal at the crossroads. Meanwhile, Hyakimaru is being followed by Dororo, who yaps about how cool he is. Despite not hearing him, he could sense the blabbering, which makes him hungry. The two eat some berries before Hyakimaru catches some fish with his arm blade. As he tries to raw dog the fish, Dororo stops him and teaches him about cooking. Hyakkimaru then shows that he also has a spidey sense to sense the color of the soul besides having superhuman prowess, that is, he's basically a blind Spider-Man. He also allows Dororo to be close to him as he possesses no male intent but is surprised to see him not leave. As Jukai still remains on the battlefield attaching prosthetics to the dead, as if he's trying to repent for something, Dororo tries to converse with Hyakkimaru to no avail. But the demon from earlier watches the village. The next day, Hyakkimaru's fishing session is interrupted as Dororo forces a business proposition on him to kill a demon and rescue the villagers haunted by it. The two get to the rich village, and after Dororo's negotiation skills, the hesitant villagers' chief offers to give them a shot in return for payment and supper, which gets Dororo very excited. After supper, the duo are resting in the shed talking about the village's suspicious wealth, but are interrupted by the weird demon and his bell. Dororo tries to get Hyakkimaru to fight it, but suspiciously, the demon just asks a question but does no harm and leaves. The leader also pops out with a slight concern on his face. The next morning, the two are taken to meet the village priestess, Bandai, who is in no state of movement. As Dororo flatters her beauty, Hyakkimaru senses her soul and whips out his blade, but they get thrown to the dungeon for attempted murder. Dororo begins to yell at Hyakkimaru, but is interrupted by Spider-Man's Spider-Man theme. The priest was also captured when he arrived at the village to slay the demon. He then explains to Dororo how similar he is to Hyakkimaru, both being the Japanese variant of Spider-Man. But suddenly the light goes out, alerting everyone, and Hyakkimaru kills a demon that popped out in the well. The priest takes a panicked Dororo along with him, escaping through the same well and arriving at the doors of Bandai's room. Bandai still acts like she is suffering from Tyrone's backshots, but the priest describes how her soul is murky red, the worst soul color. Bandai then regrets not eating them before revealing herself as my mother-in-law. Hyakkimaru, who's blind as a bat, still could not bear Bandai's ugliness, lashing out and slashing its eyes. But the chief interrupts before he can finish her, allowing her to escape. The priest and Dororo then confront him, and he tells them how she would have eaten the villagers if they had not led travelers to her, trying to do the same with the main crew. But they assure him that they can slay and relieve them of her. Bandai and Hyakkimaru fight it out in the bamboo forest, where the demon tries to take advantage of her surroundings. Suddenly, the bell demon appears and distracts her, which allows him to deal the final blow. Bandai gets back to her human form, but she begins to talk cryptically about getting back, while transforming into another form. The chief and the crew arrive, and he sees his Lady Bandai finally get killed. The bell demon reappears and Dororo tries to get him, but he sees riches buried in the sand. The priest makes him confess that the coins belong to the first traveler they offered to Bandai and how they got rich from these offerings. Dororo reprimands him by telling him how they're worse than the monsters, but the bell rings again. The bell carried by the demon belonged to the traveler they sacrificed, which traumatizes the chief. He actually wanted them to slay that demon, but they let him be as a punishment. As they get out of the forest, Dororo apologizes for not knowing about Bandai, but the priest consoles him for getting bamboozled. He explains how she looked like his dead mom and gets touched by Hyakkimaru like a 2024 YouTuber seeing a minor, but he sensed a disturbance in his soul and tried to console him. He brushes him off, and then Hyakkimaru writes his name in the sand, letting them know his name. The priest is then assured of their previous meeting when he was an ugly child, happy that what he sensed back then was true. Meanwhile, his scumbag father, Daigo, is worried about getting his ass kicked by the Sakai clan, who he believed were his allies. But instead of strategizing, he asks his men to check the temple, where another statue is destroyed. Hyakkimaru struggles as he gets another one of his organs back, which might be his sense of pain, that is his nerves, worrying both the priest and Dororo. A long time ago, the battlefield was filled with the bodies of dead soldiers as their blood soaked the soil. A soldier tries to run away but is captured by Jukai, whose favorite movie, The Passion of Christ, was surpassed at the box office by Deadpool vs. Wolverine. So, Jukai, after learning that the opposition was Deadpool fans, crucified them with nails and hammers while allowing them to rot away. As he amputates another enemy soldier to warn the rebellion, Jukai's wife runs towards him to stop him, but she gets stabbed in the back by a fellow soldier and then ordered to be crucified. Seeing her dead body, regret creeps into his body, making him question everything, and starts crying. Jukai then suddenly tries to ice guy himself by jumping off a nearby cliff. But instead of becoming the make of an ice guy, Jukai becomes the doctor of a village, providing villagers with prosthetics, including his intern, Koname, who he helped when he was a little orphan. As the villagers and his intern praise him in equivalence to Buddha, they do not know his bloody past. Talking about his past, Koname learns about it from a patient's mother, while he walks her home after her son's treatment. He confronts Jukai, who tells him everything including his days under the Tyrant Lord, how he learned about prosthetics, and trying to atone for his sins. But Koname reveals that his father was killed in that war, instead of going to buy milk before lunging towards Jukai for the kill. Jukai, instead of pleading for his life, asks him to let him live until he fulfills the kid's treatment. But Koname leaves him and his prosthetic after the treatment, telling him how he can never be his salvation, instead of killing him. After breaking down due to Koname's departure, Jukai goes for a walk but trips before getting awakened by a boat. Inside, he sees something similar to a lady's tampon Hyakimaru that shocks him by being alive despite its condition, before taking it under his wings with teary eyes. Meanwhile, Daigo is elated to see his new child, but his wife is still worried about her older son, looking at the headless statue. 6 years pass by and the kid, now grown up and chock full of Jukai's prosthetics, is moving around the forest and helping Jukai with errands. Okay, but is everyone thinking what I'm thinking? Jukai also thinks of him as his new reason for living, talking about his will to survive despite his conditions. He then names him as Hyakimaru, advising him not to succumb to demons and other terrifying entities. Later, Hyakimaru is on his usual stroll in the forest, but gets attacked by a Pokemon. He dodges its attacks, but Jukai's timely intervention saves him. In the evening, they see more monsters hidden in their home as Jukai believes that they must be after Hyakimaru. A training montage follows with scenes of Hyakimaru kicking tons of monsters' asses, while a sneak peek of his family, including the bonding of his scumbag dad and his brother, Tahomaru, is also shown. A bloody Hyakimaru returns from his battle as Jukai tends to his wounds. He then describes how Hyakimaru feels no pain and remorse, knowing only how to kill before questioning his decision regarding training him. But he again risks his life to kill the alien from Alien vs. Predators, worrying Jukai again, but this time, he shocks him by growing a leg out of nowhere. As lightning strikes the temple again, destroying a demon statue, Jukai talks about making deals with demons, pointing out that Hyakimaru may also have been a part of such deals as he upgrades him with blades. Some days pass and Hyakimaru is let go by Jukai, who believes that he has a purpose. As he leaves, Jukai gives him his medallion back, but he caresses him, which makes him tearful, and hugs him as a heartfelt farewell. At present, the priest and Dororo talk about how Hyakimaru's body parts were dealt with by someone with demons in exchange for something. As they are chatting, Hyakimaru walks on the fire to see that he can feel pain now, much to Dororo's disapproval of his method. Meanwhile, Jukai is seen on a battlefield, praying as he yet again has attached prosthetics to dead soldiers. A battlefield is riddled with POWs as they're put in line for execution under high command. One of the executioners gets hesitant and pleads with the high command, but gets offered a sword, through which he executes the prisoner. Hyakimaru is getting wet in the rain as a girl Asushi tries to call him, but Dororo interferes and describes his condition. He then rizzes the girl, who's there to pray for her brother, but gets cock-blocked by someone injured. As Hyakimaru runs off after sensing something evil, Dororo also runs after him to find a trail of dead bodies. Suddenly, they're attacked by a white-haired bastard with a supernatural sword who looks like Herbert from Family Guy with hair. Dororo asks him about his deed, but the guy just yaps about his sword being thirsty before engaging in a duel with Hyakimaru. He gets cornered by the swordsman, who manages to slash his face, but uses his prosthetic leg to ward him off, throwing him off the cliff. Dororo arrives there to give him his arm, and while searching for his leg, he sees the sword as well. As he tries to get the leg back, he accidentally gets possessed by the sword. Asushi also gets to the foot of the cliff while searching for the boys, but is shocked to see her brother, the white-haired swordsman. Hyakimaru though senses that the sword has been taken out from his leg during his search for Dororo. Asushi reunites with her brother, who is afraid that the sword will return to him. Meanwhile, Dororo is struggling for control with the cursed sword, almost killing some passerby before giving up and letting the sword control him. As Hyakimaru senses the sword's presence, Asushi talks about their past with her brother, including their parents and him becoming a soldier before showing him the paper crane, but she feels that her brother has changed, remembering how he killed the passers-by near the cliff. Dororo, now dubbed the Phantom Killer, is dragged to the village where he's confronted by a battle-ready Hyakimaru. Asushi pleads with her brother to return home with her, but Tanasuke, her older brother, remembers his time in the army as an executioner from earlier. He remembers how he executed his fellow comrade and other pals with the cursed sword, Nairu, given to him by his chief, before killing him as well to quench its thirst. But he went on a killing spree as the sword seemed not to be satisfied, similar to Minecraft YouTubers on their Discord. At present, Tanasuke tries to get the sword back despite his sister's pleading as Dororo is being attacked by Hyakimaru. Hyakimaru manages to get rid of the sword from Dororo, but Tanasuke recaptures it and reignites their duel after questioning why he was not killed. The two engage in a fierce dance of death which alerts Osushi, who sees that her brother has created new paper cranes. She rushes out to plead for his life, but Hyakimaru slashes him fatally, killing him and the sword. Osushi realizes her brother's sacrifice, crying while holding his lifeless hand. Hyakimaru begins to frolic again as he gets his ears back and allows him to hear for the first time. Another statue gets taken out as Daigo's anxiety worsens after hearing that the midwife, who was assigned the task of killing his child, was nowhere to be found by his soldiers. Hyakimaru is trying to get some shut-eye, but since he unlocked his new super hearing DLC, he has to bear the noises of the most minute thing in the forest, including Dororo. As he jokes about Hyakimaru's sensitivity while putting a bow on him, suddenly a pterodactyl attacks them out of nowhere. The monster bird gets the better of Hyakimaru despite getting slashed by his arm blades, but gets slain by the Spider-Man priest. The priest chops up the pterodactyl and then gathers intel about Hyakimaru from Dororo before stopping him from going to the village as the war is brewing. The next morning, Hyakimaru is awakened by a beautiful singing voice that he follows and gets to a beautiful girl, Mio, in the river. Bro is so enchanted by her voice and her soul that he tries to touch her but falls into her arms due to his weak condition. The priest and Dororo then take him to Mio's house for healing, where she introduces them to the injured war orphans. One of the outspoken ones, Takibo, asks her to rest while he takes care of the guest. Dororo then begins a new friendship with him as he talks about Mio's night job of serving the soldiers, which hints at prostitution before being interrupted by the priest, who goes out again to buy some milk. Meanwhile, Lord Daigo is getting gangbanged by an array of trouble from betrayal by his ally, Sakai, and now a drought. His wife also adds insult to the injury by talking about their empire crumbling away, which annoys Tahomaru and rushes Daigo to take care of matters quickly. Dororo helps the orphans out in his quirky way, while Mio checks up on Hyakimaru, who tries to touch her but fumbles again as she has to go for her job. She sings all the way, which triggers him, reaching his hand out and surprising Dororo. But does he get a boner because the boy is horny? Meanwhile, the priest follows some animals to get away from the war in the safest way, but he senses a monster lurking beneath. Mio returns in the morning and sees Hyakimaru waiting for her on the stairways. She shows him the medicine but gets embarrassed, talking about his soul-piercing gaze. Dororo gets there and describes his ability to see the souls of creatures, including monsters, which makes her feel more embarrassed and guilty. Well, that's just sad. Suddenly, Hyakimaru points at her lips and mouths something, which Dororo interprets as him requesting the song from her instead of his unspoken riz. This excites Dororo, who sees it as an opportunity to acclimatize him to sounds. Despite some hesitation, Mio gives in and starts to sing, which keeps both boys at peace while also increasing the simp meter of Hyakimaru. The priest also arrives there after failing to get the milk with some good news and bad news. He tells them about the new hideout, but also warns them about the monster lurking beneath. Hyakimaru, seeing this as an opportunity to impress Mio, heads out for a monster hunt despite his injuries and Dororo's nagging. The priest also follows him while Mio gets ready to work even harder. As the priest worryingly follows an injured Hyakimaru, Mio decides to work for both participants of the war to get the most benefit as they're moving to the new place. This worries Takibo, who unsuccessfully tries to persuade her, and Dororo, who decides to go with her to her work as her unofficial bodyguard. The priest and Hyakimaru get to the monster's den, where suddenly it pulls them towards the pincers. Both of them get some offense despite the moving sand, but the monster is quite deadly as it hacks off one of Hyakimaru's legs, shocking the priest. Meanwhile, the nightmare that everyone watching did not hope for came true as Mio is seen seducing some goofy asses near the camp. Dororo gets to the camp to find her, but is traumatized to see her getting down with some soldiers, even though she does not enjoy it. So, she sadly is a prostitute. F's in the chat, boys. A traumatized Dororo gets more traumatized as he meets the priest and a monopodial Hyakimaru. But with some solace, he learns that his voice has returned. Mio also returns from her job, but Takibo notices that she has bruises on her body, which she hides as an injury from getting tripped. He then talks about Hyakamaru's situation, which prompts her to run to him and start his care even though it's her rest time. Dororo also notices her bruises, which traumatizes him enough to make him run away, surprising the priest. He throws a big rock to let out his pent-up frustration but gets interrupted by Takibo. Dororo asks him if he knows about Mio's work, but seeing that he's blissfully ignorant as he yaps about golden paddy fields, he just listens to him. Bro just raised a red flag. In the mansion, Tahomaru gets rejected to join the war by Daigo, which angers him. He then tries to ask his mom but gets rejected. This angers Taho, who lashes out at his mother for not loving him despite his proficiency in hunting and martial arts before going for hunting despite the realization. While hunting, Taho gets commented on his behavior from earlier by his mates, which angers him. But he then thinks about how his father and mother are hiding something from him despite their love for him. Hyakamaru is disappointed by his encounter with the monster, which prompts him to go after it again, but he instead falls flat on his face. Mio rushes to pick him up, asking him not to rush himself. She then requests to hear his voice, but he rejects her as he is sensitive to the sound. She sings him his favorite tune, which keeps him at peace while Dororo and the priest quietly spy on them. The priest then leaves again, but this time he tells Dororo about how Hyakamaru still has traces on his body due to the demon. He then talks about how Mio's song seems to calm him down before warning him about the possibility of him turning into a demon. Meanwhile, Hyakamaru again rizzes Mio up by holding her face, which she enjoys as well. He has got the unspoken riz. On the battlefield, Daigo's army plans a surprise attack against Sakai's troops, while also warning about enemy spies. Mio heads out for her work, but she meets Dororo on the stairways. She talks with him about how he found out about her job for survival, but Dororo tells her that it's okay. But Bro raises a death flag by talking about how his mom also died while trying to avoid such work, but he motivates her to take back what the war took from them, including the golden paddy fields, before running away from embarrassment. Hyakamaru tries to create a prosthetic leg as Dororo feeds him and begs to hear his voice before asking him if he will turn into a monster as the priest predicted. Mio though sells her soul as she sings her song, trying to escape the horrid reality she has subjected herself to. God him, this is awful. Hyakamaru impresses the orphans with his new leg and his arm blades, while Mio leaves for work after requesting Dororo to not let Hyakamaru go after the monster. The orphans then show him their sword collection, but as Mio gets closer to the camp, she is spied on by a soldier. Later in the morning, Dororo wakes up to find that Hyakamaru has gone to battle the monster again. As he chases after to stop him, Mio also gets there and rushes after hearing the news from Takibo. But the soldiers also get there after following her. Suddenly, it begins to rain as Dororo gets to the pit to stop Hyakamaru, who is almost eaten by the monster, but this time he has a trump card up his leg, which he uses to land the killing blow and get his leg back. Meanwhile, the rain stops, but a grim scene follows showing Takibo getting slashed while the temple burns. Another demon is sliced in half as the rain stops, which worries the scumbag, Daigo. Dororo rushes to the temple to see the orphans and Mio killed brutally under spy allegations before he's caught by one of the soldiers. As he tries to deliver the killing blow, Hyakamaru slices off his arm clean. Dororo tends to Mio and take, but she sings her song under her dying gasps. Hearing that, Hyakamaru finds out that she is dying, which angers him enough to go berserk. Guts shouting Griffith in a fit of rage, he begins to slash the soldiers so brutally that it scares Dororo. Before he can wipe off the last soldier, Dororo calms him down before showing that Mio had brought the rice seeds. A calmed Hyakamaru then tragically embraces Mio while whispering her name before the temple burns to ruins. They bury their bodies in between the ruins before heading off as Mio's song is heard and her dream golden paddy field is shown. Still, not over the earlier events, Dororo remembers Hyakamaru's brutal killing while also remembering what the priest told him. Trying to get out of the somber, he tries to tickle him to make him laugh but fails. Suddenly, he hears some couple trying to bang, which prompts him to hurl stones in the bushes. But a basket drops from the top before he sees a giant spider monster. Hyakamaru also notices her and launches to attack. The two then engage in a fight, but she sprays white fluid on him before running away. They then follow her to a village, but she is hiding to replenish her energy. As she recharges, the two get a traveler pass from the village guard while getting informed about the kidnapping of villagers. They then wait to take on the spider monster while she transforms from a spider to Scarlett Johansson. Later in the morning, a man, Yujiro, sees the spider lady lying on the floor and invites her to his crib while she plans to suck out his life force by giving him the Guac Guac 3000. At his crib, he names her Ohagi before offering her something to eat. Despite some hesitation and her tsundere behavior, she finds the food delicious as Yajiro, the simp, offers her to stay there while he goes to work. Yup, definitely gonna be a tragic ending. As Dororo and Hyakkimaru scour the village for food, they get to a crowd of people looking at a notice. He then asks Yajiro, who tells them about the reward for those who capture the kidnapper. A confident Dororo tells him that the kidnapper is a monster before hinting to Hyakkimaru. They then wait for the monster as Yajiro gets home to Ohagi after seeing his coworkers die again. The two begin to talk about their day, but she asks him about the worth of his work. He then gets rid of a cockroach near her, but is surprised to see him not kill it. He then serves her food as he answers her question on the value of life, which gets her wet. Later at night, Ohagi tries to suck him off, but as she has fallen for him, she refuses to do so, waiting to hold hands with him before anything rated R. Which means that Yajiro is no longer a simp, but rather a Chad about to munch some demon cooch. In the early dawn, Dororo and Hyakkimaru catch up on some sleep after a night of being vigilantes, but later they learn from another notice that a man has been taken yet again. Meanwhile, Ohagi is getting weaker as time passes as she cannot suck anyone dry. Yajiro gets home. He then plans to free her out of the village later that night, which makes her quite happy. As we see the boys munching on some weeds due to lack of food, they decide to patrol the area. Meanwhile, Ohagi and Yajiro run towards the secret passage, but suddenly Hyakkimaru and Dororo get to them. The couple recognizes the boys from their respective meetings, while Dororo reveals that she is a monster to Yajiro. Despite knowing about her monster origins, he decides to protect her, shocking Dororo. Dororo tries to bargain that she's the kidnapper, but he reveals that it's him who's the kidnapper, but he helps people escape the village. He pleads with them to let her go, but suddenly the village guards also get there after finding out the truth. They try to capture Yajiro, but Ohagi eats some of them. Hyakkimaru senses her soul and goes on the offense, but gets tangled in her web while the two escape. Hyakkimaru goes after her after being freed towards the cliff while the guards call for reinforcements. After getting to the top using her spider powers, Yajiro learns about Ohagi's sucking business, but he's not shaken, instead rizzing her up. They get to the escape route, and as he plans to leave her there, she asks him to come along. Man has the anime protagonist Riz. He gets a bit hesitant but decides to get sucked by her for life. Suddenly, they get attacked by a hail of arrows, some of which strike him, angering her. In her rage, she transforms back to her monster form and wraps everyone up, but Hyakkimaru gets there in time. The two engage in a battle where he manages to slice her leg off while she pins him to the wall. But instead of finishing him, she goes after Yajiro with a promise to take him to a doctor. Hyakkimaru gets ready for another battle, but to his shock, he sees her soul change in color, which has him lowering his sword. The next day, it's shown that the two lovers escaped from the rout, not a sad ending as expected, as Dororo talks about the weirdness of such a relationship before being laughed at by Hyakkimaru. After a heavy rainstorm, a village is about to be engulfed by a forsaken cloud with rains of ashes, which puts the villagers in panic and makes them run for offerings. Dororo and Hyakkimaru are walking through the craters, but are surprised to see a bride being taken. Suddenly, a furry appears out of nowhere and tries to arrow the people, but gets stopped by Dororo. He threatens him, but after learning that the two have killed some monsters, he tells them about how his big sister was chosen as an offering to the forsaken cloud. Dororo then offers him the monster killing service after finding out that the furry, named Saru, knows how to find more gold. The three then get to the place of offering and manage to knock the guards out. But Saru's sister suffers from a bit of a savior complex, talking about how she will save everyone including Saru due to her offering. Dororo appears to tell her about how Hyakkimaru will slay the beast, but they get shrouded by the cloud out of nowhere, which takes the guards' lives. Dororo commands him to attack, but Hyakkimaru's senses are overloaded. Suddenly, the centipede appears out of nowhere and manages to chomp up the sister before running away as it gets hit by the sun due to the geyser. Dororo breathes a sigh of relief, but Saru is angered by the events that took place. Later, he gets to his hideout and learns that Saru is an orphan who became Terrazin and was driven away by the villagers but had grown a liking to his big sis, as she reminded him of his mother. The duo then observes that the cloud has become bigger due to the centipedes molting before devising a plan to bring it out in the sunlight to save the big sister. Hyakkimaru, meanwhile, is disappointed due to his cloud overstimulation. The next day, Dororo disguises as the bride as the monster reappears and barely manages to escape him despite his agility. Saru then proceeds their plan further and manages to burn it with fire arrows and waits for it to melt away in the sun. But the centipede does not budge, managing to block the sun as well. The centipede goes on the offense before being distracted by Hyakkimaru, who uses the sound from the arrows to successfully strike the monster. The monster awakes again and strikes him, but Dororo understands that he is using sound to locate the monster. So, he jumps and ties himself to the monster's head to guide him but gets knocked out. Hyakkimaru then tries to call him in gibberish while blocking the monster before delivering the killing blow to its eye, courtesy of Dororo. The centipede is taken out to the sun but tries to attack again, but this time it gets slashed horizontally. They then land in the spring, including the big sister, and Hyakkimaru gets his nose back, only to smell the volcanic sulfur. The two then continue onwards as Dororo is disappointed with Saru's gold, but happy that he's taken in by his big sister. She offers them a flower, which Hyakkimaru smells before offering it to Dororo by calling out his name and surprising him. Hyakkimaru does what we all should have already done, that is touch some grass and smell some flowers outside. As he has his sense of smell back, he begins to whiff up everything on the way, including Dororo. He is annoyed to see him act like a dog marking its territory, but before he can say anything more, he suddenly faints due to sickness. Hyakkimaru then carries his body and asks for help from the pedestrians with his limited vocabulary before being taken in by a nun. Dororo, meanwhile, is traumatized by the red spider lilies or manjushige, the ones from Demon Slayer, as they remind him of his dead parents. He also gets worried about Hyakkimaru abandoning him and remembers his past. Dororo was the only child of Hibukuro, leader of the rebellion against Lord Daigo, and his wife, Algia. Their uprising had the poor and the farmers whose land was stolen from them. Other brigands were similar to them during that time, but his band would only attack the samurais, separating them from the rest. Dororo also wants to join the battle with his father, but gets rejected by his mother. As he practices his target and talks with his father's second-in-command, Itachi, not that Itachi, samurais attack their hideout. A fierce battle ensues, but the brigands successfully defeat the army despite losing half of their men. Dororo gets worried about seeing his father covered in blood, but is assured by his mother. They then decide to round up and gather more men before launching their attacks. After some gruesome battles, the brigands take camp in the forest. While Hibukuro answers Dororo's question about why they only attack the samurais, Itachi brings out his proposition. He tells his boss to think about the future and proposes to join the samurais. Algia then reprimands and reminds him about how the army took everything from them, but he just passes it off and pushes his idea. Hibukuro then punches him in full swing, but he still is insistent and gets silenced after being warned at the tip of the spear. The brigands attack an army of supposedly tired samurais, informed by Itachi Sus, but get retaliated instantly. They get almost wiped out, while Hibukuro also gets arrowed in his leg as he protects his family. Itachi then reveals himself as the imposter, holding Hibukuro down and discussing the new age. He then tells him about joining the army and the remaining brigands before insulting him. He then swipes off his face with his coveted spear and ignores Dororo as well. The family is left with nothing except the spear as they scour the battlefield for anything to eat. Dororo questions if they are in hell, but Algia talks about how hell is better than their current situation. He also sees a survivor eating a dead body, which traumatizes him. The family rests up in the forest as he questions why the manjushige is red like blood. His dad then jokes about how the flowers soak up the blood of the battlefield, which scares Dororo before his mom asks her husband not to scare him. Time passes and the family gets to a village in the outskirts, but is wary because of the conflict taking place between the poor villagers, whose houses are burned down by samurais. Hibukuro blood boils and tries to interfere, but his wife asks him to step down and turn their back away. But suddenly one of the soldiers recognized his coveted spear and him. The soldier, full of rage, tries to attack him, but gets penetrated with the said spear. The remaining soldiers attack him after that, but he manages to take them down alas. He gets backstabbed to his family's horror. Hibukuro, despite his state, manages to kill the rest, but in the process of doing so, dies from his injuries. Dororo desperately tries to call his dad, but Algia sorrowfully comes face to face with their reality. After burying the body, Dororo and Algia make do with their new life, desperately trying to survive. She promises Dororo that he will be eating well after the war ends while moving through a desolate village. Soon, while they pass through the forest, an old man tells them about the samurais handing out food at the temple. Aja thanks the man and goes to stay in the queue for the handout. But she notices that Itachi is there, who also sees and goes to them. He then talks about his closeness to the Lord as a samurai before asking about the boss. Itachi understands what happened to him and teases Dororo, who tries to stone him but gets scolded by his mom. The handout then announces that there's not enough food remaining, which worries Ojia, but gets rejected as she does not have any bowl. Out of pure desperation and fear of whether they might be able to see tomorrow's morning light, she asks the stew to be poured on her hands. The handout is hesitant, but Itachi commands him to do as she tells. After getting the stew poured into her hands, she feeds Dororo despite the scalding. He is worried that she might have not eaten anything, but she tells him not to worry. Itachi pities them as he tells them to use their brain, but Dororo unsuccessfully stones him before shouting at him. Later, as they are passing through a garden of red lilies, Ojia suddenly collapses as her body takes the toll from starvation. Dororo cries and desperately tries to wake her up, even trying to find something to eat for her, but Ojia can just muster up her strength to stop and tell him to stay strong before passing away. At present, Dororo tells the nun that he'll not lose because of the war to keep his mother's promise. The nun is saddened by his backstory, but reveals that Dororo is a chick. It's a trap. Meanwhile, there were doubts. After getting well from the fever, the two get back on their journey. Dororo is thankful to the nun, but she learns that her clothes have been washed. She then worries that Hyakkimaru has been told about an important thing by the nun, trying to get him to spout it out. Daigo gets notified about Hyakkimaru's existence by one of his men as Tahomaru spies and learns about this as well. An amputated man desperately swims toward a wrecked boat trying to avoid something underwater, but gets consumed by the monster and its whirlpool anyway. Lord Daigo gets anxious due to the drought that has negatively impacted the harvest, as well as the rising tension from his battle-ready neighbors. He then goes to the temple as his son watches. Tahomaru then swears his allies as he tries to do something unbeknownst to his family. In the temple, Daigo desperately seeks for answer from the demons, doubting his other child, which gets cleared through the daimonic apparition. Hyakkimaru slays another monster and gets his clothes washed by Dororo as he cleans himself in the river. Dororo then yaps about going to a place to hustle as well as eat all the delicious food offered there. She then asks about the amulet he has, but gets no answer as Hyakkimaru is equivalent to Michael Myers from Halloween currently. Tahomaru and his allies catch the man who informed his father about Hyakkimaru's whereabouts. He interrogates him by drugging him, but the man, in an attempt to not spill the beans, tries to bite his tongue off, but is unsuccessful. The next morning, Taho confronts his father about the situation, but gets scolded by him. Taho then goes to his special spot by the lake to cry his heart out after the scolding, but gets found by his allies. They then talk about the event earlier, but get distracted by some ruckus in a nearby village by their soldier. After getting there, they learn about the river monster that is killing fishermen from earlier. Taho decides to help them out despite some hesitations from his soldiers. All of them then take boats to the monster's whereabouts in the river. But suddenly the oar is stuck, followed by violent waves. The monster appears in front of them and tries to pull them using its whirlpool, but Taho is ready for it. He then goes on the offense along with his trusted friend, but manages only to injure it, disappointing him. After getting ashore, Tahomaru and his crew hatch a plan to destroy the monster, including a suggestion for suicide bombing. But he rejects the idea of dying and then yaps to glorify his father. He then suddenly asks for uppies from Hyogo and brews a new plan after seeing the lake structure and sharing it with everyone later. They then build a trap using the forest's resources to capture the monster under Taho's command. On the day of the hunt, they successfully manage to lure the crab into the sluice of the lake before draining the water. Taho, Minju, and Hyogo then step into the ring to fight the crab and manage to beat the shit out of it. Seeing the effort, the villagers begin to cheer them up, while some try to help them by hurling stones. The crab, at the brink of death, suddenly lunges a stone at the dam to let the water in. It tries to eat the villagers, but Hyogo manages to save them while sacrificing himself. Taho desperately tries to save him, but Hyakkimaru steals the kill out of nowhere and slices the monster into crab rolls, and Taho manages to save Hyogo. As the monster is slain, the two brothers see each other for the first time in 16 years, while their parents each pray to their respective deities. Tahomaru and his crew are shocked to see Hyakkimaru's prosthetic and begin to doubt him, but Dororo asks them to thank him for saving Hyogo. Taho tries to converse with Hyakimaru, but gets irritated by his soulless eyes. Dororo then tells them about his blindness before telling them about their demon-slaying adventure before hustling with Taho to pay them up. After getting paid, they go towards Daigo's city, but before the departure, Taho asks for his name, to which Hyakimaru answers. As they're walking, Dororo counts the money, but Hyakimaru questions his brother's soul. Meanwhile, Taho is in doubt of his abilities and gets insecure due to his older brother, but his allies assure him. In the city, a strange woman might be the other midwife who helped deliver. Hyakimaru talks about the incident from 16 years ago regarding the demon child, but gets the shock of her life as she sees Hyakimaru. The two roam around the city to spend some grand before deciding to watch a play depicting Daigo's adventure. They then tell him about the incident in the temple and ask why he is in the city. The priest talks about how the city is prospering in such dire times and tells them about how he will be inspecting the demons Daigo killed. Before heading off, he comments about Hyakimaru killing humans, warning them to be careful. The two wander around the bazaar looking to do something fun, but hear about Banman being the cause of the drought from some citizens. Dororo, being the hustler she is, sees an opportunity to slay some demons and earn more as she interrogates them. Meanwhile, Hyogo and Minju tell Daigo about Hyakimaru and his monster-slaying abilities, which shocks his mom as well. After the interrogation session, the duo reaches Banman, a place the villagers believe is cursed by the demons, as well as a place of no return as anyone who crosses it gets brutally killed and displayed by the enemies. Suddenly, they are surprised by a kid, Sukuroku, who warns them about the severity of the situation by showing them positioned enemy soldiers. He tells them to fuck off, but they tell him that they're the demon busters. He then offers them food and tells them about the history of Banman and his lost home. Dororo then promises to help him get back to his home safely. Daigo hurries to solve the Hyakimaru's crisis, but gets questioned by his wife. He then tells her about how he'll do anything for his prosperity, but she asks if he's doing this to compensate for something. But being a Tate fan, he tells her to go to the kitchen. His wife crumbles down crying as she is married to an Andrew Tate fan, while Taho is seen spying again, as the enemy troop hatches some devious plan after knowing about Daigo's desperation. The kids are at the wall, waiting for the soldiers to go away. The Banman's spirit foxes arrive and Hyakimaru manages to slay them. But as their spirits, swords do less damage. Dororo also gets into the fray as the foxes only grow stronger. Sukuroku thinks of helping them, but sees the opening to get to his home and he dashes. Dororo goes after him while Hyakimaru is left to deal with Kurama from Naruto. Tahomaru desperately searches for Hyakimaru, figuring he might know about his father's secret, and confronts the crazy lady. She tells him about Hyakimaru's past, including the demons, and talks about how the demon child has returned to destroy Daigo. Meanwhile, Sukuroku and Dororo get captured by the enemies while Hyakimaru gets pinned down by Kurama. As he manages to almost destroy the demon, Daigo's army gets rid of it with a hail of arrows. The father and son then meet each other for the first time after the incident as Hyakimaru sees demonic remains on his father's soul. The priest sees that the land is cursed beyond repair after getting to the demonic temple, while the statue begins to crack from its body as well. The narrator describes Hyakimaru's sacrifice for the land's prosperity and talks about how he's drawn to his father despite their meeting for the first time. They seem to have similar demonic remains in their soul, and he asks him who he is. Daigo's men try to shush him off, but he manages to get close to his dad to ask him who he is. A shocked Daigo then curses him before commanding his men to kill him. He manages to evade them by hiding above the canopy, but questions his father's words from earlier. Dororo is hung up on a tree, but he asks the soldiers to let that dumbass Sukuroku go, but gets knocked out instead. She wakes up to find herself in a prison with Sukuroku and others. He then asks him about his village, but learns that it was destroyed, with a grueling possibility that his mother also died. Dororo tends to him, but one of the prisoners tells them not to worry. He then talks to them about how Daigo's soldiers are protected due to the goddess of mercy and criticizes the enemy's disability to cross Banman. But Dororo is more taken aback by the emblem in his headband, as it is the same as that from Hyakimaru's amulet. She then notices an opening in the ceiling and decides to escape with Sukuroku, who is a scaredy cat. Later, she manages to escape into the connecting river after Sukuroku finally chads up and intervenes with the guards, promising he won't give up as well. Tehamaru finally confronts his mother regarding the demon child. After hearing what his parents did, he questions their eligibility as parents. Daigo steps in and tells him about the condition of his land before the sacrifice, even gloating that what he did was noble and for his people. Tahomaru though believes that his father is selfish but gets gaslit by him. Suddenly, Hayakimaru arrives for a family reunion but gets chased by the army. Daigo then commands his army to kill his son, but Taho interferes on behalf of his brother. But Daigo questions him by asking if he wants to save his brother in exchange for prosperity, even challenging him to break the deal by going to the Hall of Demons. A chain of events follows as Dororo manages to catch up to Hayakimaru. Meanwhile, Tsukuriku and the remaining prisoners are sentenced to capital punishment. The priest gives up on solving the demon crisis after getting to the Hall of Demons, and Daigo bulks up his security after the Hayakimaru incident by involving the commoners. Daigo's wife prays for the welfare of Hayakimaru after learning her son's name but plans on doing something devious. Dororo learns about Hayakimaru's family on the way to save Tsukuriku. Taho gets to the hall to check on the demons but gets ridden off by them. But he is more in dilemma due to his father's question, as it holds some truth. Tsukuriku and the prisoners are tied up on Banman, where all but him get killed. This is seen as a declaration of war, and the soldiers begin to fight each other as Tsukuriku gets caught in the middle. Suddenly, the ghouls also appear as Hayakimaru gets there. Tahomaru also rushes to the war. Meanwhile, their mother escapes her castle on a horse. Hayakimaru fights off the foxes while the soldiers on the battlefield are picked off by them. He gets to the wall and is confronted by his father. Dororo also reaches there, but they see the fat mother of Kerr who killed the orphans and Mio. Hayakimaru goes berserk sensing him but gets stopped. Tahomaru also arrives there and begins to yap. He talks about how his dad was wrong for doing those heinous shit to him, but for the sake of the land, he will glaze his father and decides to kill Hayakimaru. The two brothers duel as their father watches in glee. Dororo gets to freeing Tsukuriku but cannot untie the rope, crying out for Hayakimaru as Kurama approaches them. He slashes his brother's eye and manages to slay Kurama. Their mother arrives on the battlefield as well, with the statue to ask for forgiveness. After talking about how her son has to suffer for their well-being, she commits seppuku and offers her blood to the Banman demon. Her sacrifice causes the wall to break, signifying another demon's demise in the hall. Daigo and his army escape as he curses his son for the misfortune. After everything is settled, Tsukuriku reunites with his mother, while the two head ahead for their journey. Hayakimaru dreams about his mother's seppuku and the headless statue in her hands before being awake. He then heads out and in the rustle, wakes Dororo up. He tells her that he is heading out to find demons to hunt, but Dororo tries to stop her as she's worried. Even though he listens to what she has to say, he shoves her away. She then remembers him being disowned by his family, before giving a monologue about how he can survive without a family before finally giving in and following him. Dororo learns about hot springs on the way and asks Hayakimaru to go there together. She starts selling the benefits of hot springs, but he does not give a shit. So, being the hustler that she is, she lies about the monster near the springs, which finally gets him interested.
You son of a bitch! I'm in!
Meanwhile, his family celebrated a somber victory as the land had been blessed with rain and the Asakuras fled away. But Daigo is still anxious about his deal while his wife survived the seppuku attempt with painful consequences. Tahomaru has kept himself locked up in a tower, caressing the eye that he lost due to his brother. At a waterfall, a ridiculously strong woman is dragging a man and placing him on the chopping stone. The man questions her intentions, but instead of getting answers, he gets his face chopped off by the demonic statue. His face is consumed by the bottom, which starts a transformation in the demon's disfigured face, but is unsuccessful. The woman gets excited from the reaction, but gets disappointed before revealing herself as a demon, commenting about how it's not the original face. Dororo and Hayakimaru arrive at a small hut and decide to spend the night there. She then asks him to rest up as she will be going to collect some firewood and food for later. As she collects some firewood on the forest floor, she hears the waterfall and goes to check it out. The waterfall woman is also seen following her. She gets to the waterfall but is surprised by the giant statue. Suddenly the woman appears behind her, which surprises her. But she somehow looks like her mother, which causes her to drop her guard down and try to embrace her, although the woman acts nonchalantly. Dororo then drags her to Hayakimaru for soul inspection to check if she is a ghoul. He cannot tell what she is, but the woman, Okaka, tells them it's her house. She then prepares them dinner as she narrates her backstory. Dororo asks her about the faceless statue, which surprises her before telling them about its history. She tells them about the obsessive carver who died as he could not decide on its face while trying to complete his masterpiece in the form of the statue. She then gives them dinner, which Hayakimaru eats up and hits the hay instantly. Dororo though is reminded of her mom's cooking, and the floodgates of memory open for her as she almost gets teary-eyed. She then asks Okaka if she can call her mother as she is a Xerox copy of her mom, including the voice, to which she agrees. Dororo happily hugs her and feels sleepy, but she tells her about the drugs in her porridge. She then tells her the rest of the statue's history, revealing herself as the carver, who is brought back to life by the statue, which became demonic due to harboring negativity, to find the perfect face. She also reveals how she can morph herself into who her victims desire before telling how she'll deface Hayakimaru. A while later, Dororo wakes up due to a nightmare before heading out to save her brother. She interferes with Okaka as she is dragging Hayakimaru to the chopping block. Okaka feels a bit remorseful, asking why she did not run away but gets scratched by Dororo, prompting her to throw her. She still does not give up as she lays her body on the line. Okaka tries to get rid of her again, but the rustling wakes Hayakimaru up. He cuts the rope and tries to attack her, but she gets near to the statue. He sees that the statue is at the highest dose of evil and rushes to destroy it. But the statue manages to defend itself, and he evades the attacks into the waterfall. After seeing all the faceless victims at the bottom, Hayakimaru uses the statue's weapon against it and manages to deal some damage. Suddenly, Dororo notices that Okaka has transformed into his mom from her voice to lure him. She then uses her power to rope him to the chopping block. Dororo tries to stop her and uses the Talk no Jutsu, which works initially but fails as she is not Naruto. But the jutsu still manages to make her question herself, but the statue swings its swords and slashes her. Hayakimaru seizes the opportunity to get closer to the statue's face and destroys it while pulling the classic, "Why are you hitting yourself?" Okaka's dying wish is to feel Dororo's face while seeing her smile before getting snapped by Thanos. She embraces her kimono since she reminds her of her mom as Hayakimaru watches. The two go their way, and Dororo apologizes for her carelessness, promising to save Hayakimaru whenever possible. He tells her that he's fine and asks her to go to the hot springs despite her saying that the monster there was a lie. They get to the spring and enjoy it, but are shocked to see the priest as well. He talks about how they're destined to meet, but gets interrupted by some old man and his brats. As Dororo tries to avoid them after learning that she has a map on her back, Hayakimaru watches intently as it may be a clue to get his body back. Dororo's parents are discussing her father's injury, which seems to be recent from Itachi's betrayal. Her dad then talks about not using the money he gathered from his soldiers, saying it's intended for the poor. He tells his wife not to get distracted by it if bad luck befalls, telling her to remind Dororo about their ambitions. He then tries to draw the map for the hidden treasure, but his wife suggests he engrave it, half on her back and half on Dororo's. At present, Dororo learns that her carving is seen clearly only at high temperatures. The priest then asks her about its other half, to which she tells them about how her mother had shown her the map before her untimely death. But due to her way of talking, Dororo can only remember a few details. The priest then tells both of them about how they have many more choices now due to the availability of such treasure at their disposal. He describes the peace of mind and freedom of choice brought by money and tells them to think for the future before disappearing again. Later, the two are walking and Dororo gets worried about what the priest has said to them, but Hayakimaru just walks. Suddenly, a monster and an apparition appear in front of them, asking them to buy something, which startles Dororo. The apparition vanishes, leaving behind the monster, which turns out to be a disabled toddler, and he crushes Dororo as he asks for a piggyback. The group then stumble upon a temple which had been burnt to the ground. The toddler wants to pee but needs someone to hold it for him, that someone being Dororo. Meanwhile, Hayakimaru is again called upon by the lady apparition, and she points to the ground. They then find that it's oil that had been used for the arson. The baby again plays around with Dororo, who's not having it, but suddenly a man enters the premises, which causes the baby to pull a Houdini. The man tells them about the ghouls haunting the temple as he offers his prayers. He then reveals himself as Sabaim, who is the lord of his village, and asks them to be a guest at his house. But Dororo is afraid because of his Mr. Beast eyes, whereas Hayakimaru also senses traces of demons on him. The two still go with him despite suspicion, but see that he's revered in the village. That evening, Sabaim holds a dinner party and asks the two to tell their travel stories, but Dororo asks him about the temple. Suddenly, the dancers and the server leave the room and Sabaim tells them about what had happened at the temple. He narrates how the temple belonged to a nun who used to keep orphans and train them as slaves before selling them away. Then, one day it was struck by lightning and burnt, killing everyone inside. He regrets that the village could not save them and tells them that it's the nun's spirit that haunts the wreck as a ghoul. During bedtime, both are awake as they could smell the bullshit spewed by Sabaim. Hyakkimaru is awake as he thinks that demons could attack them, while a scared Dororo thinks about what has been said to her by everyone: the back map, the priest, and her mom. She's worried as she has to carry the weight of her family's history and the future despite her age. Later, she gets awoken by a giant silkworm that lunges to attack. Thankfully, Hyakkimaru deflects it as he is in a battle-ready state, but the monster can also spit out silk, causing some trouble. But after some back and forth, he hits the killing blow. They think that it's dead, but the caterpillar cries and suddenly Mothra gets there. The moth then flings its dust everywhere before taking away the caterpillar. Dororo and Hyakkimaru wash off the moth dust because it could be toxic while Sabaim is seen standing atop a hill. The moth also lands there and transforms into a lady before getting into his embrace. He tells her about the food he offered for her and her children, but she tells him about Hyakkimaru's legacy. He then promises that he'll not let them hurt her again for his land and the people there as she smiles creepily. Dororo and Hyakkimaru are offered breakfast by Sabaim, who was curious about their sleep last night as he looks like a fish out of water. Dororo then talks about how they slept like a baby, but she's shy as she asks him to extend their stay. Sabaim then yaps about his village before offering them to stay for a longer period. They then discuss the monster as their actual intention was to slay them. Dororo then goes out to talk with the villagers as Hyakkimaru stays to check on Sabaim as he seems sus. Dororo runs around the village and observes that the villagers are really helpful and cooperative to one another, that it's just like any other village. She is then called by a little girl to eat some rice cakes with her and her grandma. They talk about Sabaim's hospitality while eating, but she reprimands her for speaking weirdly about him. Dororo then asks her about the temple, but the woman suddenly pauses and leaves strangely while the other working villagers pause and act strange before working normally. Meanwhile, Hyakkimaru tails Sabaim, who's suspiciously going deeper into the jungle. After passing through every terrain possible, Hyakkimaru gets to an open space, but Sabaim tells him about how it's his favorite place as he can see the village from there. Dororo stumbles upon a storehouse in the woods and begins to investigate it due to the suspicious behavior earlier. But she's actually hoping to score some treasure, but only finds rice. She then accidentally discovers a trapdoor that she opens in the hope of finding something but gets pushed in by some overprotective villagers. She shouts at them to let her go, but gets surrounded by hordes of caterpillars. On the hill, Sabaim, in his frog-faced glory, croaks about how the ghouls are also his people that he must protect. He tells him that he saw hell in the form of his village being attacked by brigands and wild beasts, but his land was protected by the ghouls. So, he made a deal with them in exchange for his village's peace, even making Mothra his wife before questioning why Hyakkimaru wanted to kill the ghouls. Hyakkimaru, though, does not give a F***ck if he is banging some dusty ass, holding him at sword point before telling him that he'll get all of it back his body. Dororo is running with all her might to avoid being spun in silk, but stumbles upon the graveyard of previous victims. Suddenly, light glows and the giant toddler appears to save him. She questions him why, to which the baby replies that her kindness is the reason. The baby then reveals its power of orphan souls, who take care of the larvas. They also show Dororo the sad truth of the temple, including Sabaim killing the nun and the villagers' involvement in committing arson. Sabaim, at Hyakkimaru's sword point, calls him a dumb vagabond and reveals that he trapped him. Some cocoons burst to reveal moths that attack him. He gets enraged and tells him that he's actually the same as the demons, including his father, and fights the moths. He kills one while injuring another after kicking Sabaim off the hill, but the moth manages to escape after injuring Hyakkimaru. He free falls from a height and gets knocked out, while the moth sets the village on fire after crashing into the tower. Later, Dororo gets to Hyakkimaru and wakes him up before info dumping him everything, including the orphans, the giant baby, the oil used for the arson, and the murder. Sabaim, though, is shocked to see the storehouse on fire as the villagers get agitated due to the shortage. Dororo then tells him about the lake where Mothra resides. Hyakkimaru, despite his condition, takes a boat to the lake to fight the monster. After getting to the middle of the lake, Mothra appears from beneath and attacks him to get him off boat, but Hyakkimaru manages to use his leg prop to burn her completely to crisp. He then gets ashore, but suddenly he gets his spine back after one of the demonic statues gets destroyed. The two then get back to the village, but see that it's completely destroyed as there are ruins and dead bodies, including Sabane's. Dororo feels guilty, but Hyakkimaru does not give a shit, which angers her. Tahomaru practices adapting to his new one-eyed life while his brother is limping through the forest, with thoughts about the battlefield. He suddenly remembers Dororo, who's also walking alone but gets hunted down by Itachi, and he's after the treasure. Itachi and his men surround Dororo, demanding to see the map on her back. She shows them that she does not have it, but he still holds her captive, believing that she has it memorized in her head. Hyakkimaru gets to the spot from where Dororo was picked up, while Itachi and his men travel through various terrain, covering long distance and getting close to the treasure. At night while camping, Dororo asks him how he knew about the treasure. He then explains to her how he had known about Hibikiro's collection all along and was waiting for his opportune moment but could not get any while he was alive. After learning about his death and meeting Dororo and her mom at the temple, he followed them and found her grave. He reveals that he dug her grave to get the map, which angers her, but she cannot do anything as he tells her that feelings won't get them money. The next morning, the group gets to a cliff, where Itachi shows Dororo the cape where the treasure is hidden. He then asks her to do her thing, even promising her a cut of the money before teasing her. They then get to a nearby village in hopes of finding a boat to the cape, but see that it's been pillaged. After finding out that even the boats were wrecked, Itachi thinks of a plan, but gets interrupted by a one-armed boatsman. He promises to take them to the cape for some money, which Itachi accepts despite Dororo's opposition. After getting on the boats get pulled without any oars, which surprises everyone. They then find out that they're pulled by two sharks, Jiromaru and Saburomaru, who are also his family. He then tells them about how he fed his arm to the sharks to quench their hunger, which led them to develop a taste for human flesh only. He then talks about how he fed them dead bodies, before shifting them to babies and women before the sharks grew large enough to eat a whole village. Dororo then joins the dot, but it's too late as Shark Boy tells them that the village was not pillaged, but rather eaten by the sharks. Itachi notices that they are further from their destination and commands Shark Boy to reroute at sword point, but he whistles to alert the shark about their meal. The sharks attack the other boat, systematically killing and eating its crew one by one. Jiromaru then offers him an arm to eat, which prompts Itachi to attack him, but gets injured by another shark. He then rides off Jiromaru as he asks Saburomaru to keep watch. The shark keeps a close eye on them, and Dororo asks Itachi about his tenure as a samurai. But Itachi talks about his experience of being treated as a meat shield by the Lord, which prompted him to revert to being a brigand. He then talks about how he wants the treasure, but is hopeless due to their situation. Dororo, though, is fed up seeing their long faces and gives a speech about never giving up, which reminds Itachi of his boss. Itachi is also motivated and tells his men to stand their ground. She then hatches a plan of being a lure to make the shark jump high enough to get stabbed before jumping into the water. Inside, she dances the tango of death with Saburomaru before luring it out of the water. The brigands then stab it all at once, which kills it instantly. Dororo, though, wants to get to the cape fast as Shark Boy might arrive. Itachi asks his men to makeshift oars from the boat seats, but decides to do something devious. Shark Boy follows a blood trail to see that Saburomaru is dead and beached at the cape. He gets to the body, but gets surrounded by Itachi and his men. They beat him up near death, but get stopped by Dororo. After throwing him away, Itachi asks Dororo about the treasure, but she hesitates as she remembers what the priest told her. He then forces her physically, stripping her to find out that she's a girl. He is shocked, but sees that the map is visible due to the heat. The next morning, Itachi and his men head out after completing the map from Dororo, who's tied to a tree. She then hears some wailings, which seem to come from Jiromaru. Shark Boy then wakes up to see Saburomaru still dead before shouting for Jiromaru to kill them all in a rage. Make sure to like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel to get notified of later parts for this anime as well as other fun anime content.